Hi guys, I have a question. How far along are you guys on the homework assignment?
Um, Almost 50%.
Okay. Oh, nice. Very nice. So about 75, 80 questions.
Probably something like that.
That's
Yeah,
awesome. That's awesome.
I don't know if I understand any of it, but we'll find out.
Yeah, I'm about like 50% too, but I'm just going through it. It's like, all right, next, all right, next, all right, next.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
I dedicated an entire notebook to the homework assignment.
You did what?
So I have this. It says JavaScript on it. Hold on, let me remove.
Oh,
Okay.
oh, nice.
And so this is just off of the homework.
You know, I had those printouts.
I had to because I was not understanding anything. I literally had to.
Shoot, I gotta run downstairs. I printed out 2 cheat sheets that I forgot to bring up.
Oh, that reminds me, I gotta ask Max if we can print that cheat sheet out.
Max, you're muted or something because we can't hear you. Or I can't anyway, but I can hear everybody else.
Bet you can now. There we go. Been a little while since we've been remote. My mic was like, nah, you're good. No one needs to hear you tonight. Well, welcome everyone. We are actually going to kick it off with Jason, who is our guest speaker for the evening. You know Jason as our student success coordinator or representative, but Jason is going to talk to you a little bit about data and how we can incorporate that into our capstones and what's available to you. So I will hand it over to Jason.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. So yeah, like Max said, I kind of have 2 different hats. I know like a lot of you guys do. So yeah, today here to talk about data. So I'm going to share my screen here and all right. Can you guys see my screen all right?
You're good.
Sweet. All right. Awesome. Yep. So just kind of like, what is Open Data Series? How do I use it? So my day job, I am a data program manager at the City of Syracuse's API team. And that is a long name that it stands for Accountability, Performance, and Innovation. So we work with a lot of city data from other departments. My main role in my work is helping to manage the city's open data portal. So a lot of folks don't necessarily know about it, you know, unless if they're really into like kind of city data or civic data. So I just like to kind of share some of the stuff that's on there, as well as dive into a little bit. Each data set on there does have an API that I know you guys will be learning about shortly. So they can be called to get kind of like updated data. You guys can kind of pass different parameters to get specific data. So I don't know. I still think it's cool. I know. So either way, just wanted to kind of share some of that with you guys. So just kind of the real quick, just kind of like why open data. It increases transparency about how the city provides services, provides information about spending, crime, health, demographics, and it just kind of opens up like, hey, you know, if you live in the city, like, you know, you pay city taxes. Like, hey, what's the city government doing with all this money? Like, what do they do with their budget? Like, when I make a code violation complaint, like what do they do with it? This house, you know, is like vacant. Like how many vacant houses are in Syracuse? So it's just kind of, like I said, I think it's interesting, but I work on it a lot. So this actually is a little bit outdated. This is from my last presentation. So now we actually have less than 105 data sets. The reason being I cleaned out a lot of old random ones that I just didn't think anyone was using. We had data sets from like where all the snowplow trucks were on one specific day in like 2019. And I'm like, at this point, nobody cares where the GPS coordinates for those trucks were. So we cleared them off. So right now we have about 85 data sets. So there's not the snow anymore. We do have a bunch of data sets, maps, some different crime data sets, housing data sets, as well as bike safety maps, police officer complaints, and other services. So to get there, I'm just going to kind of pull it up a little bit and just kind of do a quick kind of tour of the site. So it is just data.syr.gov. And on here, you know, if you know anything specific that you want to find, you can search for it here. But if you're like, I don't even know what's on there, you can kind of scroll down here. We break it down by different category. If you know, like, hey, I'm really interested in maps, you can click on that. It'll pull up all of our maps. If you're interested in crime and public safety, it'll pull up on that. If you just want to know, like, all right, what are the most recently updated data sets? It'll show up here. So these display the most recently updated ones. So we just updated code violations. The data engineer and we just ran it like about an hour ago. So this is effective as an hour ago. So code violations, unfit properties, the rental registry. So that stuff is recent. Some random ones here. Ideally, like all of these should have a cool little thumbnail image. I have some folks helping me put in some data dictionaries. So when they grab old ones and they put in the data dictionaries, it kind of pulls them up. So I don't have pretty thumbnails for all of them. But ideally, I will once we get these all sorted. So that is that. So I'm just going to kind of pull up some, or I guess anyone in the like the class, like anyone that you want to, anyone's interested in looking at, whether it's like police officer complaints or crime data or code violations or unfit properties. I can pull up kind of any of those. I'll try to see if I can. Feel free to look at it in the chat or share.
This is a good site to pull up on your own, and we can wait a minute for you guys to do that. But if you want to scroll through any of the data sets just to see if you guys are interested in learning any more of them, this certainly isn't a requirement to integrate with your capstone, but a lot of people, a lot of graduates have integrated these data sets in there, either as an additional feature or kind of base their capstone around it. So just because there are a ton of data sets, if you want to pull that up on your own and just scroll through them, Jason can like narrow in on one of them just as an example. If not, we'll give everyone, you know, a minute, and then we'll just pick one that Jason thinks is interesting.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Water services.
Water services. Okay. All right. Excellent. All right. So I'm going to go there. So basically that is a data set that shows the service lines and their materials in the city of Syracuse. So it's kind of a little bit overwhelming. So this is just all, you know, like what, 41,000 parcels in the city of Syracuse. So if we click on an address, it's going to have a bunch of different data in here. It's going to have, so the address, when it was installed, like, you know, the year it was installed, and then the P type, I don't know what the P stands for, but the proper, either way, you know, copper, or if it's like, let's see, this is other.
Sorry.
So, you know, you can.
P stands for pipe.
Pipe. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I should know this. So this is some of the stuff that our staff is doing as we're trying to get better data dictionaries in. Because ideally on some of the newer data sets, we'll have here like data dictionary, and it'll say all of the field names, and it'll tell you what they are. A lot of our older data sets don't have that. So that's kind of why some of them, like, I don't know all of what those fields mean because I'm not an expert in that. But thank you very much for, so that's P type. I'll go back to the map. So there's a few different things. So obviously we want to share this information with a variety of people. this could be, used on a map to kind of color code it. Maybe like, whatever, copper is one color, lead is another color, to really kind of help figure out, like, to kind of make it easier to access. This website also allows you can download the data and do it, in different format, shapefile, comma separated value, GeoJSON. And you can also look at it at the table. One of the things that I wanted to kind of highlight is, let's see, I'm just going to go back to, sorry. I'm just going to go back down to water services. Yeah, so one of the things that I think is kind of cool, sorry, going back to info, full details, here we go. All right, each data set should have an API explorer that we can kind of go to. So we can pass in different parameters, and we can only get the information we want. Say if you wanted to put an address and you only want to get the pipe type, you don't really care about when it was installed or the latitude and longitude, we can get the response. So this is going to return the JSON of all of that stuff here. And so this URL over here on the right can be used, as you guys get more experience with that, you can call that, and it's going to just return the JSON, the JavaScript object notation for all of that data. And then if we find out, like, all right, there's certain parameters that we want to pass in, we can, let's see, I'm trying to, but say if we want to just look at when they were installed, we want to find out, like, all right, say the ones installed in 2021. Actually, no, this is a little bit older data set. So I'm going to go whatever. So 2018, sorry. And so service installed 2018, and see if that gives us any response. All right, cool. So we don't have any that were installed in 2018, but either way, you can kind of start to play around with the parameters. And usually when I'm doing something like that, I will go back to the data, just kind of like to get a better picture. All right, so there's business name. Okay, so all right, so now I see like service installed, it gives the month and the year. So that's part of why, like, all right, it didn't quite come back, because it's pretty specific. But now I know, all right, so I want to find, say if I just wanted to look up, all right, all that were assigned in July of 2019 or 1909. I don't entirely know why I would need to know that or want to know that, but that's kind of how those fields are working in here right now. So I'm going to go back to API resources, open the API Explorer. Then I'm going to just go to service install. All right, cool. So then when we submit that, we should just get so the ones where they were installed in that month. So it's going to say, the business name, all that stuff. And if I want to kind of go back to only filtering, say if I just want the latitude and longitude coordinates and the address, then I can kind of modify that, get the response. And say if I decided, like, all right, cool, like I want to map that out in for a project for my capstone. Now we have the URL to call over here, that when we just kind of use that in our web app, it's just going to call and give us back the data that we want here. So it has the, the latitude, longitude, address in here. So obviously, like, that may not be a super good example, but kind of where I think it gets interesting is, let's see, so we have code violations, and that's going to be another big data set, because that's like all of the code violations since we started tracking it, I think in 2013. So it's 87,000 records. And we could do the same thing. We could query that data through the API there. And we could also, I'm just going to grab another one. We could also go to the public safety. And so we have our crime data that is also mapped with the latitude and longitude coordinates. So say if we want to just query a certain sort of thing, and I'm gonna forget some of these, but so basically it would be the same thing. I would just have to kind of look up to see what the parameters were. So say if there's a certain we want let's see, so code defined, I don't know, I think murder, I forget what it is, say burglary, I forget all the codes. I would have to kind of like check the other one to see that, but we can kind of query the same thing to get all of the, let's see, yeah, okay, cool. So yeah, that did work. But so that's given us a ton of information. Say if I only want, you know, latitude and longitude and date, you know, you can choose all of what information you want back. We have a ton of information, but you might only need, you know, address and lat long. But either way, so that's, you know, as you can see, the query URL on the right-hand side is changing based on, you know, just kind of getting the information that we need. A lot of residents wouldn't necessarily need to access the API Explorer, but I don't know. I think it's a cool thing. And then we can, you know, say we want to keep in like, all right, was there an arrest? Was there not? So now we have this response. So this is just kind of showing all the burglaries that the police have reported for, you know, 2022. And if we want to use it in a project, same thing, we can just copy that query URL and use it for, you know, a web mapping type of project. So that is kind of the main spiel that I had. And if there's information that you're interested in that we don't have on here, there's a form on the bottom that you can submit like, hey, I would love to use this, you know, this information, I can't find it. You can put in a request, it goes to our team, we look at them to see if it's something that we can share. If anyone makes a project with public data, please let us know. We have a section on the website that we share projects that folks have made with, you know, with city data. And yeah, it looks like we went through all of that stuff on here that I wanted to do here. But yeah, let's see. So that was kind of the quick version. And I'll just go to, but yeah, just the projects made with open data. I just kind of put them on here. These are ones that people in the community have made. Someone were from a hackathon. They did one with actually that water services data set. That was kind of cool. There was a car care for queues, a project that they made based on the pavement ratings. So they were trying to do kind of like, you know, MapQuest might, or Google Maps might send you the most direct route to get to a point. They were like, look, somebody had just gotten a flat tire on the team. So like, look, we want to be routed based on the roads with like the highest like road ratings. Like, okay, like this might be the quickest, but these roads are rated like terrible. You know, if you went this way, you'd have less of a chance of getting a flat tire. So I thought that was kind of a cool project also. So really, like I said, we love to feature it, you know, stuff that people in the community make with, you know, with civic data. Yeah, so that's kind of my quick spiel. Obviously, if anyone has any questions specifically about the open data, please feel free to reach out. That's part of my role for my day job, is kind of putting, you know, information on there that can be usable if folks are trying to use it, to try to help them use it. Yeah, so in the last couple of minutes, any questions regarding any of this?
Yeah, I'm looking at the sources, and is that your name, like J__SYR?
Yeah, so I help kind of post a lot of this data. So yeah, that would be me that added a lot of those data sets.
Which department in the city did you work closely with when it comes to gathering this data?
Sure, I would say neighborhood and business development we work most closely with, partially because like, I don't know, I think they have a great team. Like they're very, like they just kind of want it transparent. They're like, hey, unfit properties, yeah, this should be like made public. Code violations should be made public. the rental registry should be public. And they actually pushed us, like we were doing this all manually. We were doing manual SQL queries, updating the data. But the director of code enforcement, Jake, is like, hey, I want this data updated daily. So then Trevor, our data engineer, and we had to do Trevor did the Python script. I've just kind of played around with it and made some revisions, but he made the Python script that grabs the information from the SQL databases. It updates it to our data portal. So it updates it to the data portal every morning. And we start off with one data set, and then I was able to help work with his code and add 3 more data sets to be updated daily. So I'd say NBD right now. We also do work with the police department a lot. They've been really good. They give us crime data weekly. So we get the part 1 crimes, which is kind of like higher level murder, aggravated assault. And then part 2 crimes are everything else. So that's been another department we work closely with. One of the things I love is it's not boring. Like I'm constantly learning from the other departments because they're experts on their own area. I've learned more about police codes with this job than other ones. So I'd say those are the biggest ones right now, but we are trying to actively expand to work with other departments a little more. Trying to get some data from like the parking violation department, and also the lead remediation department. I'm trying to get some a little more positive data sets. A lot of these are bad, like, code violations, crime. One of them we want to put up like houses that had lead, but they've been fixed, that they've been remediated, to kind of repainted or fixed so that there's not lead concerns anymore. So we're putting that through the approval process to try to share that.
That's awesome.
But yeah, great question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions while I have you guys on? Okay, cool. Well, again, thank you guys very much for the time. And just to echo what Max said, it's obviously not required as part of your capstone. I do like to throw it out there before you guys get too far in the capstones, because selfishly, I love it when people use open data, but it is not at all required. Obviously, as you guys will start to look into, there's lots of other APIs available that you guys can use. But yeah, again, thank you very much for your time, and hope you guys have a great rest of the night for class.
Thank you.
All right. So if all of that is a little overwhelming to you, that is perfectly okay, right? So where we're headed in our curriculum, I'm going to actually pull up our schedule and screen share that just so you guys have an idea before we dive into tonight. So this is linked. I will show you guys where in Canvas. If you head over to Canvas, this is a tool that I live off of. This schedule and YouTube links is the master kind of spreadsheet of where we keep everything. This may not be super helpful to you now, but after graduation, when you're trying to go back and you're like, ooh, I got a job and I need to brush up on my APIs. I know Ryan taught them, but I don't remember what day it was, right? This spreadsheet is really helpful in getting back to everything. I update this every night with not only the link to the outline, but also the links to the video and the transcript so you guys can get back to them. I also have the projects kind of laid out for the rest of the week. And then everything is tagged in here in terms of who the TA was and the instructor and all of that kind of stuff, as you can see all the way to the end of the program. So where we are headed is tonight, we are going to do our tip calculator. So we're going to take that stuff that we already have started working with that prompts package. We're going to make something similar to that adding prompt that we made before. And then we're going to start working in the browser, right? We're going to start bringing back in our HTML knowledge into our JavaScript and making a little tip calculator that will output things using our JavaScript. From there, we take it a step up and we get into our browser calculator on Tuesday and Wednesday. We're going to make our user interface. We're going to bring in a couple different buttons and options and handle click events and stuff like that. And then on Friday, we'll wrap it up with starting to use some data, right? So all of that data that you just saw from Jason, that is all coming back in a format called JSON, JavaScript Object Notation, right? JSON is basically how the internet transmits key value pairs and arrays. Basically everything, all that syntax that you're learning for a JavaScript object is used by JSON. And that's how information is communicated over the web. So we're going to go back to our weather app and we're going to start playing around with, hey, if we have this object, how can we update our app to be a little bit more interactive? From there, we kick it up big time. From our tip calculator and our browser calculator and our weather app, we transition into this movie seats app. So this is a 3-day long project. We are obviously off for Thanksgiving on Thursday, next Thursday, but we're going to spend 3 days building this movie theater app. And I actually have everything linked. I'm not sure if I have the outlines public yet, but the app we are going to build is this, what looks like this really basic app, right? Where you can say, hey, I'm going to go in here, I'm going to pick a movie, and it's going to show me what seats are available. And then based off of those seats, I can say, oh, I'm going to take this one and this one. They turn blue when we select them, and we hit this little checkout icon down here, and it goes ahead and marks those seats as not available. This looks like a really basic app, but this is about 250, 300 lines of code that we're going to write together over those 3 days to make this work. And all of this information holds. So if you switch to another movie and go back to that movie, you'll see our seats are still taken. So we're going to be getting into arrays and objects and data storage, right? This is the point where we kind of cross that line as an engineer of saying, hey, we can't hold all of this in our head all at once. So what we are going to be doing together is breaking this down into the steps and saying bit by bit, what objective are we setting? What sentence are we saying? This is what we're trying to do. Then we go do it in our code. Then we go review our code and make sure we understand how it's doing that objective. So that's what we're headed to. There is a very big jump between, hey, I want to get my calculator working in the browser, right? Which is, oh, it's about 100 lines of code and everything's very linear here. I see this here connects to this over here. It's great. The movie theater app is that first line, that first time we cross that threshold where it's like, whoa, complex problem here. I got to understand how we break it down before I understand what the code is actually doing, right? So movie theater is next. And then we finish up with the fun part, which is tic-tac-toe. So we are going to build a little tic-tac-toe game. And depending on how far we get, we can even make it so that the computer has a little bit of an artificial intelligence. It will have a little bit of an algorithm that will play against you. And we'll talk about different ways we can get the computer to make decisions for us. So tic-tac-toe is kind of the penultimate, right? That is the thing that we are working our way up towards. But the good news is tonight in Tip Calculator was one of the last new concepts that you guys are going to learn. You're going to learn what we call the document object model. The document object model is what bridges the gap between our JavaScript code and our HTML code. It's the way we can tell our HTML, hey, go find this thing in, it's the way we can tell our JavaScript, hey, go find this thing in our HTML. And once you find it, set in this data from our JavaScript. That document object model works both ways. So that's what we're going to touch on a little bit tonight. And then you'll have a lot more exposure on all of the JavaScript concepts that you guys are learning from your free code camp, right? All of the objects and the arrays and the loops and the data structures and if statements and conditionals and functions and all of those things that you guys are learning through that free code camp, we are going to get practice on over the next 3 weeks. So the good news is over the next day or two, that's going to be it for new concepts. All of these new concepts that we kind of tossed the grenade your way last week and a little bit more today, that's going to be it. And you're sitting there and you're like, whoa, a lot of freaking concepts here. I'm not sure that I really understand all of them. That's okay, because over the next 3 or 4 projects that we're working on, all of those concepts are going to be exposed to you. Most of those concepts, I should say. Certain things like recursion is an advanced programming concept. If you got through free code camp and you got the check mark on that one, and then you're like, I have no idea how this is working, but it's working, that's okay. Recursion is an advanced concept. A student asked me for help on that, and I'm like, I got to cheat. I don't know how to do this. I got to go look at the answer, and then I can work my way backwards from the answer. That happens, right? There are certain things in free code camp that you need to be exposed to, so that if someone said to you in a job interview, hey, what are the 3 different ways of writing a loop? Well, you could say, well, the 3 most basic ways are a for loop, and there are different kinds of for loops, and a while loop, and there are different kinds of while loops. But then there's that other type that's technically looping, and that's recursion, right? I would not expect a interviewer to say, hey, go write that as a recursive loop. That's an advanced topic. Like I said, that would be something that I would struggle to do in an interview. So there are certainly concepts there that you just need exposure to. You don't necessarily need to fully wrap your head around it, but over the course of the next 3 weeks, we're going to start building actual projects. These are projects that you're going to be able to put on your resume, right? These are projects that you're starting to look at and starting to go, yeah, tip calculator, I could see myself using that. One thing I will note here is that we are not going to spend a ton of time on user interface design, right? We're not going to be going through the entire wireframing process. We're not going to be using a ton of the Bootstrap grid. We're not building something that is super pretty here, but keep in the back of your head, hey, if this is something that I would like to put on my portfolio, maybe that's something I spend a little bit of time on this weekend of either, just cleaning up my HTML, adding in some CSS, adding some styling and colors and that kind of stuff. Or you also may find that this is, again, one of those times that you need to sit through class and just get the understanding of everything, right? Of let me get exposed to this, let me take notes, let me write down all of the steps, and then maybe over the weekend, I try and recreate this, or at least parts of this, right? So for the calculator we're going to make, maybe you don't make every button work, but maybe you make, a couple of the number buttons work, and that's a good way to get exposure to this and practice to this. For homework, this week, you already have your homework, right? Your homework is that free code camp. I don't have an additional homework assignment for you yet, but the week is young. Give me a couple days on that. I reserve the opportunity to assign you a little bit more on that, but I also know that that free code camp is super intense. So whatever you get this week is going to be light, if anything. Over the following 2 weeks, we're going to give you a slightly different. We're not going to say, here's the movie seats app, turn in movie seats. Instead, we're going to ask you to go through and comment out the movie seats app. What that is testing you on is not, hey, can you write this code from scratch? It's going to test you on, do you understand this code? Can you tell me how this code is working? Because that code is not going to be in logical order. The order in that we interact with that code is very different than the order that we write that code. So what your homework will be for week 9 and 10, I'm actually going to give you all the finished code, all of the code that we work on in class, and I'm going to say, prove to me that you understand this. And that's where the comments come in, right? You think you're off the hook because you don't need to write all of the code. Well, what's even harder is actually understanding that code. And so that's what your homework assignments will be for week 9 and 10. I don't want you guys to feel pressured into coding along. However, if you are someone who understood better by coding along, up until this point, I would encourage you to do that. I will continue to take breaks when we're at that logical stopping point. So the people who are coding along have the opportunity to catch up. But the other thing I will say is for those who are not coding along, that is your opportunity to go back in that 10-minute, 15-minute instant replay, right? Go through what we have done, and instead of zoning out, say, all right, I got to ask questions now, because these projects keep on growing, right? Remember back to our first website, it was like 20 lines of code. Well, now we're at 200 lines of code, right? And so if you get lost in that one spot, it is so easy to zone out and be like, I'll catch up later. That is not the point of this, right? The point of me coding along here is your chance to ask those questions. Take advantage of the fact that class is live, right? You really want to be leaning into, let me talk through that. And even if it's something where you're like, I don't know what question I have, but I know I'm not getting it. That's okay. Raise your hand, shoot me a message, shoot Karen a message, be like, I was getting it. The light bulb was on the whole time. And then all of a sudden there was a power outage and I don't get it anymore, right? That's okay. Just let us know that. These are advanced topics. And while we have taught this before, we've only taught these particular projects in the previous cohort. Our curriculum continues to evolve, right? This is almost as new for me as it is for you in terms of these projects that we've completed. The other thing I will say is that we're not trying to hide anything from you. So if I go back to share my screen here, you can see in the week 8 day 1 outline, which should also be linked in Canvas, we've got the final code here. And you can actually click on Tip Calculator Terminal, pop it open, and if you were signed into GitHub, which I clearly am not and will need to be, you can see everything going on in this final code. This is not us trying to test you, because you don't need to turn this in at the end, right? This is not a plagiarism thing. We're not worried about you copying and pasting this. If this is something where you look at the final code and understand that better, then that is totally fine, which is why we link it in the daily outline. So with all of that said, I'm going to shut up for a minute. Does anyone have questions where we're headed before we dive into the into traditional stand-up?
Is this the week where we learn how to make HTML, JavaScript, and CSS interact with each other?
Yes, it sure is. This
Okay.
is not only the week we do that, this is the day that we do that.
Oh yeah.
Any other questions? Okay. Sorry, now you can see all of the code that we were working on, or that we will be working on. And this is, again, all linked in this week 8 day 1 outline. And we'll be doing a live share and going through class like we normally do. Okay, before we kick it into stand up, I am going to single out Doug. Doug will actually be our TA next week. Didn't know if you had any comments, Doug, before we dive into our JavaScript week 2.
No, I'm just sitting in to try to hit the ground running next week. So I'll probably join one more day this week as well. That's it. Hi, everybody. I'm Doug.
Doug was a top of the class graduate from cohort 3. We're super glad to have him joining us as a TA. As with all of our TAs this cohort, they are all graduates of the program, right? So Doug was in your shoes exactly 6 months ago when we started working on these very same projects, right? So Doug has been through this. He's made it all the way to the end of the program and been able to take all of the insights from that time and apply it back to when he was in your shoes 6 months ago. So definitely lean into using Doug starting next week. Karen is our TA for this week, but Doug is just jumping in to get an idea of where we're at. So he'll be able to hit the ground running with you guys next week. Okay. Let's switch over to stand up for today. What did we learn last week? How are we feeling about JavaScript so far? Give me a vibe check. How are we doing? Where are we at?
Those resources are, well, helpful as you'd hope they be, as one would hope they would be.
Good, good. Like hearing that. What else?
It's interesting to see the way that you have to like switch your own like mental logic depending on what language you're working in. Because like I got like about like halfway through the module, and then I'm just like, do I even remember HTML anymore? Like it's like having to think about how you're wording things, where you're placing them and all that. It's interesting.
Yes. And the good news is we only have one more syntax for you to learn after this. That is called JSX. And that is kind of if HTML and JavaScript had a baby together, right? So the good news is that it is not entirely new syntax. It's just blurring the lines between the two together. So I lied a little bit. We have a little bit more syntax to learn when we get to SQL, which is towards the end of the program. That's how we interact with the database. But other than that, yes, syntax is always a challenge. For a while, I was writing Python code at work. And then writing JavaScript code on the front end. And I was putting a semicolon at the end of every line, and Python doesn't use semicolons, right? So it's those little things of you do get to the point where it starts to be more muscle memory, right? Where those parentheses, those curly braces, those square brackets become a lot easier to type. So that is the good news, is syntax does get a little bit easier with practice. But it is certainly a matter of switching between the two of them. And over the next, especially this week, we will make sure that HTML is not too rusty, because we'll be incorporating that back into our code and projects throughout the rest of the module. I also want to say on the schedule, you guys can see, we've got our 4 weeks devoted to JavaScript. We are in week 8, which is the second week of JavaScript. But coming up next, we do have APIs. APIs are taught by Ryan. Ryan has taught the API module for as long as I can remember. And we actually upped this in the curriculum this time around. You get 2 weeks of Ryan instead of just 1. So all of the stuff that Jason was showing you will start to make a lot more sense. APIs are application programming interfaces. In other words, how can we use other people's servers and data in our own app? How do we get our code to talk to other people's code, right? That is the programming interface. So if you're a little overwhelmed with what Jason presented tonight, that is okay, right? Maybe you caught a little bit on that, hey, that's using curly braces and there are colons and keys and values in there. Those are objects, right? If you picked up on a little of that, that is great. If not, you've got an entire 2 weeks devoted to how you interact with that data, how the internet works, and kind of bridging the gap into, well, all of that data is out there. How do I use it? So that's the only thing, the major thing that I would take back from Jason's presentation is, hey, maybe I start going on that data website and I just start seeing what data is available to me. It's okay. You don't need to know how to use that data yet, but it is sometimes interesting to go into those data sets and let some creative juices flow there. But I just wanted to mention that of week 11 and 12, which is kind of early December. That is when you'll start diving into how you start using those data sets and that kind of information. Okay, I already touched on what we're doing today. We're going to do a tip calculator in the terminal, and then we're going to dust off our HTML and rebuild that tip calculator in the web browser as well, and start using our document object model to get our JavaScript to interact with our HTML. But before we dive into that, I know I gave you guys, I believe the unit is a metric shit ton of free code camp homework to do. Does anyone have questions on any of those particular free code camp exercises? We obviously don't have enough time in class to go through all of them, but chances are if you got stuck on one of them, one of your fellow students also got stuck in the same place. So I want to just devote a couple minutes at the beginning of class to make sure that we have time to go through those assignments. Exona, go ahead.
Hi. So I was kind of getting confused. As I told you, I was taking notes for every question that I had. But I really didn't understand, or maybe needed more of an explanation on what's the difference between a global scope and a local scope.
Okay, great question. So I'm going to do that off the cuff and kind of my own example. However, if you find that this doesn't answer your question, let me know and I'll pull up the exact free code camp question. So the easiest place of understanding scope is within a function. So I'm going to just open, go full screen for me. I'm just going to open a new file. And oftentimes what I like to do is go into my downloads folder and just save this as like scratchpad.js. Just so like I've got a place that I can run it and know that like, hey, this is a temporary file, I can delete it. So what we're going to do is we're going to say like const num1 equals 5, right? And we have access to num1 because when we console.log num1 and we say, I gotta get into the right folder here. Right, we get 5 out, right? No big deal there. That's what we expect. However, this is what we call in our global scope. It is called global scope because it's not really in anything. It's at that root level, the global level, right? It's not inside anything. Okay, well, if that's the case, that must mean that there is something opposite the global scope, and that is your local scope. So one way we can make local scope is with a function. We can say const num printer. And we can say const num2 equals 7. And we come in here, we console log num2, we run this, we don't get 7. Why?
Because the global scope overrides the, no.
Loaded question.
That did not make.
We didn't give num2 and the local scope a value, so it's gonna go back to the global.
Nope, we did. It's number 7.
Since it's inside the function, like it's only the function knows what num2 is because it's local. It's inside the function, whereas num1 is outside of the function, so it's a global scope.
But that doesn't explain why do I not see 7?
You gotta call num printer.
There you go. That's what I meant by loaded question. It actually had nothing to do with scoping. What happened here is we made a function, but we know functions actually get completely ignored until we call or execute the function. So if we come down here and say num printer, and we put those parentheses are saying, actually go execute that function. Go find num printer up here. And these parentheses are saying, now go run the code between these curly braces. So now when I run this, now I get 7 and 5. Okay, great. But that doesn't fully answer the scope question. We said that this is global scope, and we know we have access to it out here. We said that this is local scope, and what we mean by local is that it's local to what's inside these parentheses. So that's why we have access to num2 equal to 7 here, because it's inside the scope of this function. However, if we do a console log of num2 out here and run it, what do we get? We get an error that says num2 is not defined. Well, it is defined. We defined it right here. However, it's defined inside the scope of this function.
So it would have to be console.log num printer.
No, you don't have access to that variable at all. You only have access to that variable inside the function. If you needed to, for some reason, you could say let num2 out here. Then you could set your num2 equal to 7 here. And then after num printer runs, you could print num2 and get 7 out.
Okay. Okay.
However, if we flip the order of this and we say num1, num2, num printer, what's going to happen is num printer isn't going to set it equal to 7 until after it gets console logged out. So instead, what we're going to get is undefined because it actually hasn't set num2 equal to 7 yet because this function hasn't run.
So you have to run the function first before you get the console log.
Correct. Because in this case, this function is setting num2, but what we did in this example, we moved num2 to the global scope.
Okay.
So global scope, you have access to inside a local scope. However, you don't have access to local scope at the global level.
Okay.
And we basically define a new scope whenever we have curly braces that are not used for an object. So function is one place that we use that. The other place that we use that is an if statement. We can say if 1 does not equal 0, obviously that's a very stupid if statement, but you could do that in here. And then you could say let num3 equal 4. We do not have access to num3 out here. So if we run that, we're going to get num3 is not defined. Again, because these curly braces are not being used for an object, they are being used to define a new block of code. That block of code is used for functions. It's used for if statements. It's used for for loops. It's used for while loops. Right, whenever we, I hope Free Code Camp touched on blocks of code. But anyway, anytime we're using a curly brace without, for a reason other than an object, we are defining a new scope of the code. And scopes can actually be inside of scopes. If you wanted to get really technical, you could do a function inside of a function. And if that inner function had a variable defined in it, we wouldn't have access to it at the outer parent function or the global level, but we would at that inner nested function.
Okay. All right, thank you. That was a little bit more understanding because I was getting confused the way that they worded it too, and I'm like,
that is the very reason that I'm spending class time on it, right? Because there's so much going on in those assignments, and it's so disheartening to get through 30 of them, and you're like, yeah, man, I get JavaScript. Like, this is awesome. And then you get to one of them and you're like, this could be the very reason I never get JavaScript and I am a failure at life and I will never be a programmer, right? And so that's why I want to touch on these, because oftentimes there's that easy concept that just because they explained it in a different way makes it harder for you to understand, right? Which is why Careers in Code is a live boot camp. It's why you're all going through it together. It is because that, you know, this is not here, you watch these videos, you get the concepts these ways, and if you don't, you're a failure. Well, that's not really how programming works, right? That's not an effective way of learning. And so that's why we spend time on these live questions.
thank you.
When I'm immortalized in 100 years and students are still watching these videos, I will feel differently. But until that time comes, get a Tupac hologram going. Any other questions from homework or anything from last week or anything really at all before we dive into what we're focusing on tonight?
Should we be scared?
No. Next week you can be scared. This week you can't be scared.
Okay.
There is, so we had a lot of conversations on this. There's a big jump between the projects that we're working on towards the end of this week and the project that we're starting at the beginning of next week. However, and I think it's valuable for all of you guys to hear this, I would rather cover everything and have you guys have exposure to advanced concepts without fully wrapping your head around them, then I would say, hey, I'm going to take it a little bit easier on you. We're not going to have time to get to these concepts, but then you never have exposure to them. Then you've never heard of them before, right? So I'm definitely pushing you guys. The speed of the boot camp cranks up just one more notch for JavaScript. And so this is where we get hands-on. This week will feel a little bit faster. Next week is going to be like, oh man, like a lot coming at me, right? So lean into what learning styles are working for you guys, and don't be afraid to continue leaning on them. And if it's not working, schedule your one-on-ones and ask me questions, right? I am not here coding this out just because I need the practice in JavaScript. I'm doing this so you guys have the opportunity to ask the questions and see the pacing as it goes through, right? So do not be afraid to ask questions. If you are afraid to ask questions, message them to Karen. Karen has no problem interrupting me, and we will get them answered for you. Okay, are we ready to get our feet wet in code again?
You know, Max, I will say that I did take your recommendation that you gave several weeks ago about what particular type of mouse to use. And you gave a recommendation for this like Logitech MX Master 3S for Mac. And let me tell you, if I've been drooling for the past 10 minutes, that's why. It's so ergonomic. They should cut me a check. It's so ergonomic. It's beautiful. I've never seen anything like it or work with anything. It's awesome. It's awesome. So I would highly, highly recommend, I don't know, perhaps using your stipend for it. I'm not really quite sure, but it is just flawless. It's like a hot knife on butter. It's just so incredible. So that's
most people I recommend it to go, are you crazy? You're spending $100 on a mouse? You can get a mouse for $25. What is wrong with you? And then they use it for 15 minutes and they're like, shut up and take my money. This is amazing.
I thought the same thing. That's why I waited so many weeks. I was like, gosh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. What is this? What is this? Please. Yeah, until I got it. Highly, highly recommended. Thank you so much. So I appreciate that.
I will say, because, you know, I don't have an affiliate code for Logitech, but I probably should. My keyboard died last week or 2 weeks ago. The control key randomly started hitting itself. And, you know, I'm quite abusive on my keyboard. I'm surprised I have not had the hardware authorities called on me yet. But I did just get the Logitech mechanical keyboard that matches my mouse, and this is now becoming my new best friend. I had a split keyboard before. There's still a learning curve, a little bit more than the mouse because it's more muscle memory on the keyboard, but it hasn't made my recommendations list yet, but it's working its way up to that.
Well, thank you very much.
And Karen dropped a link in the chat in case you were interested in it. It does come, there are some older versions of it. I keep the MX Master 2 in my drawer as a backup. And you can save a little bit of money, 30, 40 bucks if you go for the slightly older version. There are not huge differences between the two of them. There was the 2 and the 2S. And then they came with the 3 and the 3S, kind of like the iPhone line, right? Like every year they do a minor update to it. If you see a good deal on the MX Master 2 or 2S, like don't hesitate, go ahead and buy that. There are not significant differences between the two of them. But if I had $500 to spend on a mouse, I would still be buying this mouse. There is not much room for improvement.
You don't need like an external Bluetooth thingy?
No.
Good.
Connects right into the Mac and no USB dongle taking up a spot on your Mac. And you can even pair it with 3 separate computers. So if you wanted to use it, actually, fun fact, most people don't know this. If you have an iPad, you can actually pair it with your iPad and use a mouse on the iPad as well. Or Windows or a second Mac or whatever you have. Okay, with all of that said, let's dive into our code. So I am in VS Code, no shocker there, hopefully. I'm going to File, Open Folder. I'm going up to my code folder and ceremoniously creating my new week 8 folder, turning up the heat a little bit on our JavaScript. In our week 8, I'm going to create another new folder called day 1, and I'm going to pop that folder open. And because we are starting with a terminal tip calculator, just getting a little bit of practice with our prompts package again, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this tipterminal.js. I've got a capital T there, and I've got no space in that file name. No space in that file name, super, super important. If you put a space in the file name, you're going to have problems running it in the terminal later. The reason why I said tip terminal is because we're making a second tip calculator tonight in the browser, and it's very easy to mix the two of them up. So we're going to call that tipterminal.js. I'm going to hit enter on that, and I'm going to create a live share for you guys in the live stream channel that you can follow along with. While you're getting that set up, I'm going to right click and open an integrated terminal here, right? This should be nothing new to you guys, but again, I'm right clicking on the file name and opening an integrated terminal. That's going to pop me open down here at the bottom. And we are going to need our prompts package again. So I'm going to come down to the terminal, and I'm not going to use node. I am going to use what command instead to install a node package.
npm
node package manager, npm install prompts. I'm going to hit enter on that. That's going to generate a whole bunch of boogaloo over here. That's okay. This is all used by node under the hood in order to make sure that we can use that prompts package. So the last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to say const prompts equals require prompts. Right? We're bridging the gap here. The const is saying, hey, we're declaring a new variable. Prompts is the name of the variable. We've got our equal here that's saying, hey, whatever is on the right side of this equal is going to get stored into the left side of the equal. Require is a reserved word in Node and in JavaScript that is saying, hey, we're pulling something in from npm. The parentheses are saying, hey, the require function needs more information. The quotes are saying that we have a string coming. The value of the string is going to be prompts. We put the closing quote for the closing of the string. We put our closing parenthesis for the end of the function. We are good JavaScript people and put a semicolon at the end of the line, even though it isn't required. And that is the level that we need to be getting to in our JavaScript. Yeah, we've got the general idea here of prompts as an npm package that we're pulling in, but we want to get to that level of understanding of what is every single letter, syntax, symbol, everything doing in our JavaScript. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to console log out hello world, just to make sure that everything is fired up, that we don't get any errors with this prompts package. We go down to our terminal. Now we are going to use node, and we're going to type in TI. You could type out tip terminal, or you could just hit the tab key and it will auto complete. We're going to hit enter, and we get our hello world out. Pausing there, kicking off a poll, which we haven't done in a long time, and giving everyone a chance to catch up. If you need to open the live stream, you can do that now. We are just shooting for hello world in our terminal with our const prompts require prompts working above it.
So every time we start a new JavaScript file, we always want to install the prompts.
No, tonight is the last night we will be using prompts. So we only need to install packages that we'll be using. In fact, npm will go back into the archives a little bit, and we won't be using npm again until we get to React. 13 out of 17 people voted. We'll give people just another minute or two. If anyone has questions, ask now or forever be lost for the rest of class.
I don't know. This is kind of a nitpick. Mine is working and whatever, but my prompts is yellow, or else yours looks kind of green. I don't know.
Maybe just because I had it highlighted.
Yeah, okay. And I have an underline around prompts, but everything's still running.
That's fine. It's mad that we're not actually using prompts yet. So it's probably calling you out and saying, hey, you made a variable, but you're not using it
Okay.
yet. Using it yet. Okay, we good to roll forward here? All right. So our tip calculator kind of got to ask two questions, right? It's got to ask, what was your total bill? We need to know how much your total bill was. And we also need to ask, how much are you tipping on that, right? And what our tip calculator is going to do is it's going to take our total, and it's going to take our tip amount, and it's going to multiply that out and tell us what our tip amount should be and what our total final amount is. So what we are going to do is we're going to come down here, and there's this nasty syntax we've got to use because the prompts package is asynchronous, right? It has to wait for our user to input some numbers. So this is very nasty syntax that just tells the computer, heads up, this asynchronous code is going to run. We need to tell you that asynchronous code is headed your way so that you know, hey, you can pause for that end user. So while we're in here, the first thing we got to do is we've got to prompt our user for some answers. So before we can even prompt them for the answers, we've got to tell the computer where to store the answers. So we say const answers. And what we do is we say await the prompts package. Where's this prompts coming from? It's coming from our prompts up here, which is firing through our npm package. And the prompts package is going to ask it two questions. Now, I'm going to have you guys pause here just for a minute, and I'm going to show you that there are many ways of writing this code. So pause here. You should not follow along for a second. I'm going to show you not only how we write this code the first way, but how we can refactor this code out a little bit. So the simplest way is to say, hey, prompts is going to ask two questions. Because there are multiple questions that are getting asked, we need to put that into an array. So those outer parentheses are saying run the function called prompts. The next set of syntax there, those square brackets, are saying we're passing you an array. We're passing you multiple pieces of information, a list of data. And then on top of that, we're going to pass you an object. Well, the object is using those curly braces. What are the curly braces saying? They're saying all of that data is going to come in a key value pair. So there are a couple pieces of information we need to pass it. Still pause on coding this out. I'll give you guys a minute to catch up. We're going to code it all out, and then we're going to go back and we're going to refactor our code to make it a little bit easier to read. There's a couple pieces of information the prompts package needs. One is the name of the question we are asking. We're going to call that the total. It needs to know the type of the data we're asking. We're going to say number. It needs to know the message to show the user to prompt them. What was the total bill? And then we are going to use another object. Okay, well, where's this object coming? It's still in this array. We're passing it multiple objects worth of questions to ask. And this object is all related to each other, right? That is all saying, what is this one question we're asking? But down here, we have an entirely separate question we need to ask. So we're going to put in another object with a comma in between it. That comma is saying, hey, array, there's another piece of information coming. And we're going to say the name on this is going to be the tip. And the message is going to be how much are you tipping? And then the type needs to be a number. So we see all of this. We haven't tested any of this yet, but I guess we can. We go into Node in our tip terminal. It says, what's the total bill? We'll say $100. How much are you tipping? 20%. And it just is done. Okay, well, obviously there's more we need to do here, but before we do that, this is kind of nasty. We've got a function, which is those parentheses. We've got an array, a list of data, which is those square brackets, and we've got those curly braces, which is the object. This is totally normal code to see as an experienced JavaScript developer. I would not say that this is in need of a refactoring once you guys are feeling more comfortable with JavaScript. But you're not at that point yet. We are in the second week of JavaScript. So instead, we can take this a step back and make this a little bit easier to read. That is what is called refactoring your code. So what I'm going to do, and this is when you can start following along with me if you would like, I'm going to say const question1 equals. What does our first question equal? All of this data is about our first question. So I'm going to take all of that and make that equal to my question 1. Now, what is my second question? Question 2 is all equal to this object in here. Okay, now how do we say, hey, prompts, we want to ask both of those questions? We say const questions equals a new array. What is in that array? Question 1 and question 2. Okay, how do we know all of that is working? I can console log out my questions and see that looks just like everything that I had in this prompts package. So what I am able to do is now take this out of here and say, hey, prompt for my questions. This code is actually identical to that last code that we ran. The only difference was we stored those questions in their own variables instead of passing it all in one giant array to the prompts package. So I want you guys to understand here, this curly brace, still an object. Doesn't matter if it's an object that we're storing in its own variable or an object that we're using down in the prompts. This array, those square brackets or braces, that's still an array. That's a list of data. But instead of putting the object in it directly, we stored the object in question 1 and then used question 1 down here. Okay, now that we've got all of that formatted properly, we can console log it out to see what is getting stored in it. But we can also pass that questions to our prompts package in order for us to say, when we run this, it says, what's the total bill? And we can enter a number and hit enter. And how much are you tipping? We can enter a number and hit enter. And then the program is done running. So I'm stopping here. I'm relaunching the poll. And remember, if you are not coding along, or even if you are coding along and you're still reading through that code, still making sure you fully understand it, don't vote in the poll yet. We are asking, not only were you able to get your code working, we are now asking, are you understanding this, right? Is this sinking in?
Yeah, but where's the answer?
It's not. We haven't gotten to that yet. All we've told the computer is to ask for the numbers. We haven't calculated the answer yet. Hopefully this isn't.
I
Oh,
I
go
do
ahead.
have a quick question. Would
Yep.
it make a difference if those questions were defined outside of the function? Could they be called like as global
They
questions
could,
or?
yes.
Okay.
As long as they were defined before this async function ran. So we couldn't define them down here, but we could define them up here. All right, we're going to keep going unless anyone has questions.
I'm just following along and then copying and pasting your code to kind of keep up in that way.
Sure.
It's telling me that it's wrong. I'm just gonna try it again here real quick. So
Okay. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I just have a question. So the cons, so question one in itself is an object, and everything that's within the curly brackets is the
values of the object.
So the values of the object. So when you do it at the bottom where you put node, what'd you put? Node tip terminal JS. What exactly are you asking? What the message is?
I am telling it, go run everything in tipterminal.js.
Okay.
So what I'm telling it to do is go run line 1, and it's like npm stuff. I'm going to go do that. I'll store it in the variable. I'm done. Then it goes, oh, console log. Oh, crap. I got to show something to the user. What do I show to the user? Hello world, which is why we still see hello world as the first thing that gets outputted here.
Mm-hmm.
Then it comes in and it goes, oh, an async function. All right, great. I know that you might use that sneaky await word. That's fine. Now I'm going to come through. All right, all of this object is going to get stored in question 1. Don't need to tell the user about that. I'm just running code on my merry way. Okay, this entire object, I store that in memory as question 2. Okay, on my merry way. Okay, new array. What's in the array? Question 1 and question 2, I store that in questions. User doesn't need to see any of that. I'm working behind the scenes. Oh, console log, crap. The user wants to see everything that I put in memory for the questions array. So I'm going to log all of that out.
So all of that. So from async all the way down to on top of constant question equals question 1 and question 2. So that's what it's doing.
Correct.
Console log. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to.
No, you're good. And then the final thing it's doing is it's getting down here and it's like, all right, I'm going to store something in answers. Now I'm going to go into this prompts package and I got to wait for prompts to be done. What information does prompts need to run? It needs all of the questions. So it passes that in.
Okay.
And then prompts is like, hold up, I got stuff to do. I need to prompt the user. I need to wait for them to enter a number. I need to do all of that stuff. So we come down here and it says, what's the total bill? Well, we didn't really tell the computer how to do that. That's all coming from the NPM package for us. All we told the computer is, this is the question that we're asking, and this is where I would like you to store it, and here is the data type, right? And we did that all with our parameters here.
Okay.
So now it goes through all of that. And then to Jennifer's point, she was like, well, where's the answer? Well, we just told it to store it in answers. And then we were like, okay, you're done. Goodbye. We didn't tell it to do anything with the answers yet, but it hit the end of this file and was like, I'm done.
Okay.
And so in order for us to get different output out of that, we'd have to change our code and go rerun it. And then we would be all right.
Okay, cool. Now I understand. Now I'm understanding. I'm getting it. Thank you.
That's why I'm here. Okay, so let's get to our program actually doing something. And then we have one more feature to implement before the break, and then we're going to go rebuild all of this in the terminal and get a little bit more comfortable with the document object model, or the DOM. Okay, so we've told it to store it in answers, but I don't really know what answers looks like, because we told it two things are stored in there. Is there an array in there? Is it an object? Is it I don't know what's in there, right? Well, the way we can see what's in there, I'm going to clean up some of my code here. I don't want my console log hello world running anymore. And you know what? I don't need to reference that later. So I'm going to just go ahead and delete out that whole line. Then for my console log questions, maybe I come back to that. Maybe that is helpful for me down the line to be able to see what my questions are again. So instead of deleting that line, I'm going to hit Command/, and it's going to comment it out for me. That's going to tell the computer, no, I don't actually want you to run this code, but I'm not quite ready to delete it yet. And then finally, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to console log out my answers. So I go rerun this, and I don't see my answers yet because I need to tell it, hey, I gotta fill in the answers first. So I type in 2 numbers, and what do I get out? I get those curly braces here. That tells me it's an object. When I know it's an object, it's got to be key value pairs. The key is total because we told it to store that answer in something named total. That total became our key, and the value is the number that I typed in, 5. That means that I also have access to my tip. My tip is 10. So because it's an object, I can use my dot notation to get access to those numbers. So I'm going to start doing that. I'm going to say, instead of console logging out my answers, I'm going to say your tip should be, and then I'm going to do a plus here, and I need to calculate my tip amount. So I'm going to say my tip amount, I actually am going to calculate up here. I'm going to say tip amount, and how do we get the tip? We take the answers total, the total that was inputted here, and we multiply it by our answers dot tip. So I come down here and I say your tip should be, and I put in my tip amount. Come down here and say, okay, my total was $100. I am tipping 20%, and my tip should be $2,000. Okay, well, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not tipping that amount. What step did we forget here? This is the most math I will ask you to do all cohort. Do not worry.
Percentage?
Yes, this needs to be a percentage. We said this is $100, and then we said this is 20. Well, whenever we tip, we're tipping 20%. We're not tipping 2,000%, right? So what we need to do is we need to put this in parentheses and say, convert this tip amount into a percentage by dividing by 100, right? Taking you back to your Algebra 1 days, or I don't know, probably even before then, right? You got to move that decimal place over 2 places in order to calculate your tip. And so we got to divide by 100 there. And then, of course, we need PEMDAS because the divide by 100, we only want to divide the tip by 100. Okay, I promise that is the most math I asked you to do this whole cohort. We used to have a lot more math in the curriculum, and that was not necessary, and we very promptly got rid of it as soon as I was fully in charge. So this is it. We're going to make sure we're saved. We go down to our terminal. We type in 100. We type in 20, and we get your tip should be $20. Okay, well, that's cool. But, you know, when you tip on a credit card, on a debit card, they ask you for your total too. We've done all the work to get our tip amount to show up. We should tell them the total as well. So we can say, well, we can do another console log here and say your total bill comes to, and then say all we need to do is take our answers total. Because again, answers is an object, and we're getting out that particular value from the object. And then we are going to say plus your tip amount. And I'm going to put those in parentheses so it knows, hey, add the total to the tip amount. We don't want to just concatenate those two things together. What we're going to do is take the total, add it to the tip amount that we calculated up here, and that's going to show me my total final bill, including tip. So I come down here, I say $50 and 20%, and it says your bill comes to a total of $60. All right, how are we feeling? We touched on objects there. We touched on functions with that prompts package. We touched on arrays. We touched on array storage, right, of defining our array. We touched on key value pairs. This feeling like day 2 of being exposed to this, but all that free code camp, hopefully giving you a little momentum. Everything from last week started to build our first kind of functional, hey, I could see using this as a program, right? This is nice. Don't ask me how to get Node running on your iPhone or your Android device, but we are making good progress, right? We made our first little functional program. So we're going to take a break here. We'll be back at 7:25, and we are going to rebuild this in the browser, and it's going to look very different over there. But before that, Exona, go ahead. Oh, you're muted.
I need help with my code just to
Okay.
make sure because something is wrong, but
Okay, go on break. See you guys at 7:25, and go ahead and share your screen, Exona.
it says I can't share.
Oh, well, I thought I clicked the stop button. Sorry.
It's okay. Okay. So this is the code that I have. I don't know if
You've got a comma instead of a colon on line 7.
a comma. Oh, right here. Okay.
And a semicolon instead of a comma on line 10. And I think that's it.
Isn't that is so crazy to me. Console log is not a function.
You were missing a semicolon on line 2.
Okay.
All set.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
All right. I'm not going to dive into it, but I do want to show you guys one last kind of variation of this tip calculator. And this is linked in the outline as well. So if you are curious about it, you can dive more into it. But you can see all of the work that we did up here is already in here with the answers and the tip amount and all of that stuff. I did add in the concept of a loop if you are curious on it. Basically, what I did is I said the let keep running equals true. And then I added in this while loop up here. And what do we want to keep running in this while loop? We want all the code from this opening curly brace all the way down to this closing curly brace to run. So all of this code is still the same, But then we added one other one that said, hey, go use that prompts package again. And this time we're going to ask, would you like to calculate another tip? Based off of this keep running prompt, it is going to update the variable called keep running. Keep running is then going to come back up here. And if keep running is true, it's going to run through all of this code again. If it is not true, then it will stop running that loop. So I just wanted to show you guys just one more example of you can come in here and set some additional information in and be able to loop your code. But I wanted to move on to the tip calculator just because we've got some new concepts to hit over there while still exposing you to this. Any questions on that before we roll forward?
So you can have more than one await prompts within a
Yes.
code.
Yes.
Okay. And the prompt is to prompt you to do something.
Correct. That
Okay.
is the NPM package that we pulled in up here. And that prompts package is what like had the pre-built things to handle in, like wait for the user to type it in, when they hit enter, go store it here, the number type, all of that kind of stuff.
Gotcha.
And if you ever wanted more information on that, you can go to npm.js and just do a search for the package name, and that will give you all the documentation. No, it will just make a complete liar out of me. We go to the repository, it should show us. It will give you the breakdown of how to use it, different examples of it. This is something we did right with the questions, and we chained them all together. And then more information down here, like, okay, we used something like type. Well, what does type take, right? And so there are information. There's like a link here for prompt types, and it shows you all the different types that you can prompt using. So documentation, whenever we use that third-party package, it looks like, oh, well, Max told me to do this, so that's how I know to do it. The right I know how to do it is going into the documentation and reading and knowing what they are telling me to use there. Okay. We are going to move on. I'm going to close out of all of this stuff. I'm still in my day one folder. Node projects and front end projects normally don't live in the same folder, but for this one, they aren't going to conflict at all. So it's totally fine to keep it running all in one. So I'm going to create a new file called index.html. If you guys are following along, feel free to here. In my index.html, I'm going to put my exclamation point and my enter. That's going to drop in all of my boilerplate for me. And before I forget, I will update the title here. Oops, the title here to say tip calculator. And then I'm going to create another new file, and I'm going to call it browser tip.js. You know what? Let me be consistent there and use camel casing. And with that said, I'm going to close out of all my other files because the only two files we're working on is index and browser tip. So we've done this before where we come into our body, we do an H1, we say hello, we go down to our go live button, and we get our hello showing up. Okay, well, that's great. But how do I get my JavaScript to show up? Well, we know in JavaScript, we can do a console.log hello world. And I'm looking down here and it's not down here. Well, of course, it's not in our terminal down there. That terminal's for Node. That's our server side, right? That's not anything that is happening in the browser. So I'm going to close out of this because we're not using the terminal at all. I come over here and I go, wait a second. When I right click and go to inspect, there's a console down there. That looks convenient. Let's go in there and there's nothing. All right, what if I refresh the page? Do I get nothing? Okay, well, just like our CSS, whenever we create a new file, we've got to tell our HTML, hey, there's some JavaScript to go run for all of this, right? So we're going to go back to our index.html, and down in the body, we're going to use a script tag. Doesn't really matter where you put the script tag. There are slight differences between them, but the most common place I've seen them is at the end of within the body, but towards the end of it. And instead of using a href, which is what an anchor tag uses, or the link tag uses, because that would make sense. No, instead we use src. src stands for source. Where's the source of our JavaScript code living? And here we are going to say browser tip.js. Make sure your casing matches. Casing is important. You want to make sure that if you put a capital T in your file name, you want to put a capital T in the script tag. And then we just close out the script tag and it puts in our self-closing script. Now, when I save that and come back over to my browser, I have my hello world in the console. Pausing there, polling, all of that good stuff. So it's just like our link rel style sheet, except this time we use that script tag.
Max, I have a stupid question.
Yes.
So in your index on line 10, you wrote hello.
Yep.
But over in the terminal section on the console lever, it said hello world. Where am I missing the world part?
That is in the browser tip.js file.
Ah, okay.
That is actually the very reason I put world in there, was I wanted to separate out my hellos.
Okay. And since the script source is the browser tip, that's what's going to show up
in the console. Correct. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Jennifer, go ahead. If you can find unmute.
I just did. Okay, I'm looking at my terminal.
Yes.
In the browser.
The console in the browser.
Console, sure. Yep. So it says uncaught syntax error, explain token, and it's a less than or greater.
Okay. So go ahead and share your screen.
Okay. It's a mess, but okay.
Okay, and that is saying in index. So let me take a look at your code. And we're gonna go to your index. And nothing looks wrong there. So let's go to your browser tip.js file. And that's because there's nothing in there. So we put console.log parentheses quote hello world in there.
Oh, I thought that was supposed to have been in the tip terminal, or no?
No. So you can close out tip terminal. We are completely done with that for the evening.
Okay. So in here, it's supposed to say
in the browser tip.js, we're going to put console.log and your parentheses and your quotes, and then say hello world in there.
Yeah, okay, I missed that part.
And save that. And go back to your, okay, that works too. Yep.
Could have refreshed it, I guess, right?
Yes, yes. And your console, and you are good to go. Heads up, there are actually two consoles. If you like it down there, that's fine. If you don't, you can close it here and open it from here instead.
Open it from, can you just circle where you said open it here instead?
Right here.
Thanks. I have too many windows.
No problem. Okay, any questions? Let me just do a quick recap for everyone. We created 2 new files over here, index.html and browsertip.js. We used our !Emmet shortcut, keyboard shortcut, in order to dump all of this HTML in for us. We updated our title to tip calculator just so we don't have an untitled hanging out in our tab. We put an H1 in there that said hello. Then we put in the script tag that says browsertip.js. Just so we can keep track of both files, I put my browser tip over on the right-hand side here. You don't need to do that. If you want to, you can grab the tab and drag it over here, and that will keep it over on the right-hand side. I then wrote some JavaScript in my browsertip.js with that console log hello world, and I made sure that my script over here was linked. This script tag is telling our index.html, hey, go run the code in browsertip.js. Then I hit go live down in the bottom so that I could get into my code.
And variables. In computer science, data is anything that
Jennifer, you're I gotcha. You were unmuted. Okay, now over here in the browser, I right-clicked and I hit inspect. That brings open my window down here at the bottom, or of course you can always move this by hitting the 3 dots here and then going in and picking your location of where you would like your tools to show up. I like mine on the bottom. I go to console in here and I can see my hello world. Okay, any questions on any of that before we keep going? Okay, so now we got to think about our last version. Our last version said, hey, we use the prompts package in order to in order for the user to enter their information. But we're going back to HTML here, right? We don't ask the user via a prompt to enter information into a website. What do we use? What have we used to get a user to enter information into HTML?
A field.
A field called
input.
Input. So that's what we're going to do here. I'm going to take out my H1 because I don't need that anymore. And I'm going to put in a label that says bill total. I'll put in and close my label off. And I'm going to put in my input, and I'm going to say the type is a number. You guys thought you were done with your HTML, didn't you? Coming back at you. And we're going to do a line break in here, and we're going to do another label that says tip amount, and we'll say %. And another input that's the type of number. And I'll save that. And I come back over to my browser. And all right, this is looking pretty good. And I can type in a number. And I can type in a tip. And nothing. But before we get too far, just going to pause here, make sure you guys have your 2 fields showing up over in the browser. Giving you guys an extra minute here. Dust off that old HTML syntax. Make sure you're following along. Make sure we understand that input, the type, that BR is for our line break there. We've got labels. This is ugly. We didn't even pull in Bootstrap, and that's okay. We don't need Bootstrap on every single website because this is the JavaScript module. We are out of pretty HTML, CSS land, but of course we could always add our CSS and our Bootstrap back in and style this if we wanted to.
Could I see your web browser, please?
So why did we create a new browser thing instead of using a tip terminal? Just because we're using the terminal in the browser this time?
We're building a website, a tip calculator website, instead of just using raw JavaScript in the terminal. This is the first time that we've got our JavaScript running in the browser instead of running in the terminal itself.
Okay.
Any questions here before we move on? We've bridged the gap between our JavaScript. We told our browser to run that JavaScript. We haven't really done anything with it yet, right? We just console logged it out. We got the two linked. That's okay. Just getting our user interface done before we make it interactive. So I'm sitting over here and I'm like, all right, I entered my 500 and I entered my 20%. Do it. Calculate the tip. Well, how do we tell it to do it? We need a button that's going to say calculate tip. Not spelled like that. There we go. So I come back over to my browser and now I've got my calculate tip button. So I'm rocking and rolling here. I got my input, I got my tip amount, I got my calculate tip button. I type in 550 and calculate tip and nothing happens. All right, you're about to break the great HTML JavaScript divide. Are we ready? We need to tell it when that button is pressed, go ahead and do something for us. Well, we need some way to hook into that button. How did we use CSS to select a particular thing we wanted to style?
Classes.
And IDs. So we're going to put an ID on this that says calculate button. My God, what is wrong with me? Calculate button. Okay.
Do you really want me to answer that question?
Oh, quiet you. I can mute you.
You still have a spelling, if that's gonna matter later.
Oh, it sure is.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Why did I say calculate and not go or, something like that? But whatever. Okay. So I've got my calculate going on. We're going to come over to our JavaScript and we're going to say document. Now, what is document? Document is kind of a reserved word like require or const or let. Document is what is bridging our gap. When we say document, we mean go to the HTML document, right? We've heard about HTML files. HTML files are really just HTML documents. That document is a key or reserved word in JavaScript that is saying, I'm telling you to go do something in the HTML. What am I telling you to do in the HTML? I would like you to get an element by the ID. What ID do you want? Well, remember, this is JavaScript. Get element by ID is a function. A function has the parentheses after it that makes it run. And then those parentheses take some arguments inside of it to help the function run. Well, we're telling it to get element by ID. It needs to know what element ID to get. So we are going to put in quotes and we are going to say calculate button. This time spelled right the first try. Okay, so we're making good progress here. Now, what do you want to do with that element? What we are going to do is we're going to say on click of the element. Don't ask me why that's a lowercase c. It's JavaScript. It's all camel cased. It should be an uppercase c. It's not. It's just the way the JavaScript language is written. And now we want it to do something on that on click. The problem is we want it to do a bunch of things on that on click. So what we're going to do is put it in to a function. Now, this is using the newer arrow syntax. If you have gotten to the ES6 module in Free Code Camp, this may look familiar to you. If you are used to the word function, that is okay. That is an older version of JavaScript. However, we're teaching you those latest standards, right? We're teaching you the modern version of JavaScript. We're teaching you something that even Free Code Camp hasn't been updated on yet. So whenever you see this equal and then that less than sign, greater than sign, that is an arrow function. That is basically saying the same thing as if we put the word function in there. So I don't want you guys to see that and be like, whoa, what is that? This is just another syntax for writing out a function. So now we get to tell it what we want to happen when that button is clicked. So all I'm going to do is console log out button clicked. And the reason we do this is there is obviously a lot that can go on with that one line of code. There's a lot that can go wrong with that one line of code. So we try to test more frequently, not get too far ahead of ourselves and say, hey, let's just make sure that when we click on the button, it works. Okay, so I come back over here, I click my calculate tip button, and I get a button clicked. Going to pause there because I would be shocked if one of you didn't have a syntax error. So I'm going to pause and make sure we're all humming along here. Anyone needs help, just raise your hand. In another minute or two, that's cool too.
So how would you know what to put in the console log? What if it's something else? Like, how do you know it has to be button clicked? I know that we're clicking a button to get to that party time. So you're just gonna, I was gonna say party time, okay.
The console 99% of the time is to either help you debug or help another developer debug, right? You would never send someone to your website and be like, oh, open the console and see all of my amazing content in there. It'd be like, open the console, what is that? Right? How many years have you used Chrome and not even known that inspect was in there? Or maybe you played around with view page source, right? But all of this is like, I use that browser every day or some browser every day. I had no idea the console existed. The console is just for us, right? So we could get really far into this. I could write out, this is going to be a 20-line program. I could write out all 20 lines of it and then go and test it and it not work. And I'm like, well, crap, I don't know if it broke on the first line or the 19th line, right? And so that's why we use those console logs, is just to say, is it working, right? Can we see the output here? If it is, that means something lined up, because we could have said element by ID was spelled wrong. We could have put a capital C in the on click. We could have spelled calculate right here and wrong over here, and that would just stop working. So if we misspelled the ID here and came over here, we'd be hammering on this button all day long and nothing would be coming out. So the console log is just, we're putting in anything to see if something comes out of it. We don't really care what we put in that particular point.
Okay. So what about the like the dot get element by ID or the dot on click? Like, how do we know we're supposed to do that?
Yeah, so couple ways of doing that. One is the answer is all documentation, no matter what approach you take to it. One approach you could take to it is saying JavaScript DOM stands for document object model, and that's going to pull up W3 schools. This is kind of the more technical approach, and it's going to show you how the whole document object model gets built. And if I pull this out a little bit more, I am hoping that they have a whole JS DOM section here. And if you go into DOM methods, one of the first things they'll show you is get element by ID. So this is the W3 answer, right? This is the, if you want to go through step by step, it will give you a whole breakdown of that. The other thing, so like an on click is an event. The event happens when you click on it. We want something to happen. That's called the event. And if you go down to the DOM events, you'll see things like on click in here and be able to start kind of piecing that together. So that's one way. The other way is you could do something as simple as JavaScript run on button click. And W3 schools, of course, is the first thing that comes up. Stack Overflow is a second. So you can scroll down here and they will go through what that on click is, defining the function, how you make the function work, all of that kind of stuff as well. So it depends. If you are someone who's like, give me the docs, I want to know everything first, and then I'll figure out how to use it from there. W3 schools is going to be your friend, or MDN. If you're someone who you're like, I know exactly what I'm trying to do, I'm going to put that in Google and then figure out what they're trying to tell me. Stack Overflow is your friend, because that's going to give you, you know, the direct answer of like, you forget all the rest of the documentation about on click. Here's the code that does exactly what you're trying to get it to do.
Right.
Which sounds like more ideal, but isn't always. Sometimes it is much better to fully understand it than it is to kind of just copy and paste that code in. Okay, so we got our console log working. Now we got to think about this. Before, we had the prompts package giving us access to the data. But now we need to extract whatever numbers are typed in here. Well, in order to be able to get the numbers from out of there, we've got to get access to that element itself. We have to get access to the entire input. So what we're going to do is we're going to add two more IDs. We're going to say ID equals total input. And down here, we're going to add our ID to our tip input. Okay. Now we can get rid of our console log party time. And now we get access to those. So we say const total input is equal to document.get element by ID, and we're getting the total input. And then we are going to rinse and repeat. Console.log tip input equals document get element by ID. You can see I'm using my autocomplete here. I'm letting VS Code suggest something and hitting the enter key. So I save and I come back over and I type in some amount and I hit, well, that makes no sense. I hit calculate tip and nothing happens. Well, just like in our node JavaScript, we told it to get that, but we didn't tell it to output anything. So now we can do a console log of our total input, come back over here and type in some amount and hit calculate tip, and I get input type number, ID total input. Okay, well, it did get the element that I asked it to get, but I want a specific piece of that element. I want the value of that element. And value is a property that gets set by the document object model. That value is what is getting from the HTML getting passed into the JavaScript via that document object model bridge. So I can do total input dot value. Total input, right? Think about that document object model. Well, document, we're already using document here. That means our HTML. When have we used this dot notation before? We've used it with objects. The document object model is taking our HTML for us and converting it into an object that we can reference inside our JavaScript. That means that because it is kind of an object, we can use that dot notation to get additional values out from there. So I come back over here and I do 120 and I hit calculate tip. And look what I get out. I get 100. Well, that's helpful. Let me store that somewhere. Instead of console logging it, I'm going to store that in my total. And then I'm going to say const tip is equal to my tip input dot value. Okay. So now we want our tip amount, right? And we can reuse that by saying const tip amount, just like we did in our Node JavaScript. And we can say take the total and multiply it by our tip divided by 100. But because we're just storing that, we need to console log out the tip amount to see it. So I come over here. I have a $100, $20 tip. I hit calculate tip and I get 20. Pausing there, making sure you got your tip amount 20 showing up in your browser.
Could you show your HTML? Okay, so if you had like, would a get element by class work? Like if you had the class instead of the ID, or is the get element? Oh, go ahead.
You can do get element by class. The only thing that you have to be prepared for if you use the class is that the classes you can reuse. You can use the same class on multiple items. So when you do get element by class name, instead of returning the one item that you're looking for, like an ID uses, instead it returns an array of all of the classes that match.
Okay, I only ask because like, so the get element by, and then you can just put whether it's an ID class, whatever, that line of code will just get literally show you that.
Yes.
What you're gonna pull.
Yep.
Okay.
You could even do, I think there's a, like you can do a console log document. Don't follow along with me by this. You can get elements by tag name and get all of the inputs. And then if you look over here, it's an, you see the square bracket? That means it's an array, right? So when you open that, it has this input and this input in it. It just happens to be an array. So we couldn't directly apply an on-click to those. We would have to like loop through them and apply the on-click to each one of them instead of applying it directly like we can with the element by ID. We'll get into that a little bit later though. Xona, go ahead.
So mine doesn't say that. So when I go to check and under my inspect console, it does not say that. So do you mind if I share?
Go for it.
Okay, so it's let me just move this over here. So that is my code.
Okay, what's your error? Reading value of null. Okay, go back to your code.
I can move this over if that helps.
I'm thinking this is a weird refresh issue. Go back to your browser.
Do I put that on the?
I don't, that should trigger the refresh on the save. If you just hit Command S on that and then go back to your browser and hit the refresh button, just to make sure everything's like cleared out and up to date. Now try it. No, you still have a problem on line 6. Okay, so I'm starting to, if you go back to your browser, I'll just show you a little tip. You see how it says browser tip.js here? When
Yeah.
it has that :6, that's
Mhm.
saying that it's stuck on line 6 of your code in your JavaScript.
Okay.
So you can go back there. It's going to be something stupid. Total input, get element by ID, total input. You've got your ID here. Aha. You are missing quotes right here.
Oh. Why did it say line 6?
Because it was the first time it tried to use the tip input and it couldn't find your tip input from your tip input here because the quotes were missing here.
Aha. All right. So instead of having one thing to be worried about, we have a bunch. Okay, cool.
Wait until the back end.
Oh, yay.
Are we gonna get, is this considered debugging or?
It is.
Oh, really? Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
No problem. Jordan, go ahead.
Never mind. I thought it was supposed to be showing up next to it. It's supposed to be showing up underneath.
In the console. Yes, underneath.
Okay, I'm good.
Okay. We'll get there. That's the next step. Archerel, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a similar code to Exona, and I trying to look at line 5, but I'm not seeing it. If you can help me out.
Yeah, go for it.
All right.
All right, cannot read properties null of a value. Your JavaScript looks fine. So let's go look at your HTML. You've got your tip input, you're missing your total input ID on line 11.
Okay. ID total input. Okay, all right.
Don't forget your closing quote.
Oh, I just deleted it, didn't I?
I didn't even see it.
Oh.
Okay, save, and then head back over to your browser. And now you should be able to enter both your numbers, hit your button. You are good to go.
Thank you.
Okay, so any other questions before I roll forward? Okay, so we've got our tip largely working, but it's only showing up in the console. Well, remember how we said the document object model is the bridge between our HTML and our JavaScript? Well, bridges can go both ways. Just like we can pull information from our HTML into our JavaScript, we can also take information from our JavaScript and push it back into our HTML. So what I'm going to do in order to do that, I've got my tip amount, I've got my tip amount calculated here, but I need some hook to shove it back into my HTML. Just like we used our IDs here to hook our HTML into our JavaScript, now we need to do that in reverse. So what I'm going to do is under my button, I'm going to add a div and an ID of results. And what goes in that div? Nothing. We haven't calculated anything yet. When that div first loads, it's just going to be an empty div. There's nothing in there to get started. So we come back over to our JavaScript, and now we are going to do our final push. We're going to say document get element by ID. The element we are going to get is our results element. And then we need to tell it what we're going to set in there. Now, value makes a lot of sense because value is what we use for the inputs, but divs don't really have values. They've got HTML inside of them, right? Well, in order to get to that HTML inside of it, we call it inner HTML. And then we say, okay, well, if we've got access to that inner HTML, what do we want to do with it? So we're going to say equals, and we're going to say your tip should be, and our tip amount. And then we are going to say for a total of, and we're going to say our total plus our tip amount. So I come over here, I say 100, I say 20, I hit calculate. Ooh. Okay, well, let's pause there for a second. My tip, $20 is working. My total of 120, not working so great, but we'll fix that in 1 second. So JavaScript, and what we should have over here, your tip should be 20, and then ignore this total amount over here. And I'm going to start a poll on this because another step. So we're getting a lot going on here, right? We're using our old friend, the string concatenator. We're using our string values. We're using our variables. We're doing some math here. Lots going on. Now we just have that document object model, that document that we're getting access to where we're passing information back and forth. All right, so keep them going here. Anyone have questions? Taking you for 5 more minutes, and then we'll switch over to those terms. Okay, so we've got a problem here. It's 120, and I'm like, what? That should say 120, not 10,020. So there's some concatenation going on there that I don't really love. So I want to debug this a little bit. So I'm going to add in a console log here, and I'm going to use type of. That is a JavaScript keyword. I'm not sure if FreeCodeCamp covers that or not, but I'm going to say type of total. Well, what's a variable type? That's the string, that's the number, that's whatever, right? And I'm going to also come down here and do a console log type of my tip. So I come in here, I do my 100, I do my 20, I hit calculate tip. And whoa, that's not what I expected. I get a string out. That's because even though we specified type number over here, whenever we pull a value out of the DOM, it always comes over as a string. We would like it to come over as a number, but instead it's coming as a string. Does anyone know how to convert a data type from a string to a number?
Isn't it like two number? Or
That's
something
the
similar?
way to do it in Java. We're using JavaScript. So in order to get this answer, all we need to do is a Google search for JavaScript, convert string to number. And the first thing that comes up, oh, free code camp, isn't that refreshing? I'm still going to Stack Overflow. And the first thing that we do, we can use this number here, but this is the way that I would lean into doing it. It's called parsing. Parsing is whenever we take the data in one data type and convert it to another data type. That is called parsing. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over here, and just out of an abundance of caution, instead of parsing it as an int, we're going to parse it as a float. That float is going to allow us to enter a decimal and get the right answer out. So I'm going to save all of that and go back to my code. Again, I put this parse float in here, but parse float is a function. How do we know it's a function? Because it's got those parentheses after it. So parse float takes an argument of the number that we would like to parse. Whatever data is required to make that function work is the data that goes in there. So we have our parse float. I come over here. Now I do my 100 and my 20. And not only do I get my total out as expected, but now down here, I see that my data type is a number because it's successfully being parsed. There is one bug that I will show you guys and leave it up to you to fix. If I have a bill total of $100.50, 51 cents, ew, that's ugly. My tip isn't actually going to be $20.10 and 0.2 cents and 0.00004. So I will leave that to you guys as an open bug. If you guys would like to attempt to fix that, you can. And if you get stuck on it and need help, the link in tonight's outline in week 8, day 1 has the solution for you in that link. So if you are looking for the solution, if you attempt to try it on your own and can't get it working, you are welcome to look at the code in there to figure out the correct answer. Leave that up to you guys because I want to do one more read through of this code before we go into terms and call it a night.
Which outline was that again, please?
Week 8, day 1, tonight's outline.
Yes. Okay. Oh, okay.
Under the tip calculator browser link, there is a solution in there to solve that problem.
Okay.
Okay. So the last thing we're going to do is a run through of all of this code from tonight, and then we will do our terms and call it. So, you know me, I love drawing up all of my my code. God knows I'll never be a football coach, but I can still draw all of those diagrams. So we started out by creating our inputs here. We labeled them, we created an input, we created a little line break on them. We gave our users a way to input their numbers, and we said, hey, we need 2 inputs. So we created that here. Then the next logical thing was to say, well, we need some button for them to click on. And when they click on the button, that's what's going to make all of this code run. So we came back over, we linked in our JavaScript, which is our JavaScript file from here. And we said, okay, what do we want to do in there? We said that we want some JavaScript to run when a button is clicked on. So what we did is we added our ID calculate button. Then we went over to our JavaScript. We used our document object model, our DOM, to bridge our JavaScript. And we said, get the element. What element are we talking about? The button. Use the ID, calculate button. Calculate button is this ID right here. Then we said on click and we defined it as a function. So it's gonna let me open this just a little bit more. No. Okay, that's better. We said on click of the button, what do we want to do? We want to run this function. Okay, now we got our on click working and we say, what do we do next? Well, in order to calculate the tip, we need to get access to those inputs. So we added in both our get element by IDs, and because we're referencing it, we needed to add the ID total input and tip input over here. This is what I mean by the order that we write our code is not necessarily the order that our code is read from top to bottom. We didn't have those IDs in there because we didn't need to hook into those inputs when we first created them. But once we started getting into our JavaScript, we needed some hook into those. So we hooked in to our two inputs over here. But those inputs are the whole input. It's the whole HTML tag. We needed access to the value. So we got the value and we stored it in our total, just like we got the value and stored it in our tip. Then we came down and we said, let's calculate the total times the tip divided by 100 and store all of that in our tip amount. So we console log that out. That was all working. And then we said, well, we need to show that answer up somewhere. So we said, okay, let's create our div ID results and link it into our JavaScript right here. Now, what part of that results do we want to update? We want to update the inner HTML, the HTML inside of the results. That means everything in here is going to get set to whatever is in here. So from there, we said, all right, what we are going to do is we're going to generate out this string that's going to take the tip amount from here and use it in our string. Then it's going to generate out our total, and all of that is going to get set back into our results that show up to the end user. The last thing we did was we said, this tip total plus tip amount isn't working. So we added in these console logs here to figure out, oh, total and tip are a string. They're strings because whenever we get values from the DOM, they always come in as a string. So the last thing we did was we added in the parse float here and here to convert or parse our string into a number. Questions, comments, concerns?
I'm sure I do, but I don't know what they are.
No, it's a lot. Didn't think it would take 20 lines to get a tip calculator running, let alone all that HTML, but we're starting to bridge that gap, right? And hopefully some of this is starting to come together for you guys, of the equals and the const and the parentheses and the all of that, right? This is how we are able to take our inputs and use our get elements by ID to start bridging the gap between our JavaScript and our HTML over here. We do some JavaScript-y stuff, then we take our string and we set it back into our results right over here.
For me, at the moment, I wonder what the workflow would be for this. Like for HTML and CSS, we'd like do it like one at a time or at the same time. Like how to go for HTML and JavaScript? Do we go
The
back
same
to
exact order that we did it in tonight.
uh
Okay, what are we trying to accomplish? We need them to be able to input 2 buttons or input 2 numbers. Okay, now what? Well, we need to have some go button to make our JavaScript do something. Okay, now we get over to the JavaScript and we're like, well, how do we know that the button was clicked on? We need to know a name of that button. So we add in the ID. And then we're like, okay, now we need some way of accessing those inputs. So we go back to our HTML and we add in IDs for the inputs. Okay, now that we got the inputs, we need to get the value from the inputs. We're going to do our JavaScript. Okay, now we got to calculate some number out. That's still JavaScript, right? That's more the interactive part of it. Okay, now that we've got our results in JavaScript, how do we shove it back into our HTML? Well, there's no place in our HTML to shove it. So we need to create a new div. We put our ID on that, go back to our JavaScript, we get that ID out, and then we put our final answer into that inner HTML. So there is a lot of back and forth between your HTML and your JavaScript, and it really does depend on how interactive is this. How much code is going on behind the scenes. You could spend 3 minutes in your HTML and 30 minutes in your JavaScript. You could be working on a very complex problem that is all in JavaScript, and then there's just a tiny, teeny little output that says calculation done, right? Or something like that in your HTML. So this is why your homework assignment, not for this week, but next week, is going to be to go in and add comments to all of the code that we write in class. So you're going to go through here and you're going to say, number 1, create total input. Then you're going to say number 2, create tip input. Then you're going to say number 3, create button. Then you're going to come over here and you're going to say number 4, hook button to click event. And you're going to come in here and go, well, what did we do next? We said number 5, add ID to total input. Number 6, add ID to tip input. And we came over here and said number 7, number 9, number 7, excuse me, going crazy. Get inputs from HTML via document object model. And down here, we say number 8, retrieve values and parse from string to number. That's what your homework will be next week on the movie app project and the following week on the tip terminal, right? This doesn't make any sense because you come into the JavaScript and you're like 478. Who's counting this? Some toddler? You come over here and you're like 1, 5, 2, 6, 3. That makes no sense. But this is the level of understanding, not only in the order that we wrote it, but the order the computer is executing this. Okay, what happens? All of these inputs show up. Then the browser is like, I'm done. Then it comes into this browser tip and goes, oh, okay, when they click on that calculate button, I got to do something. Otherwise, I'm just ignoring all of this. Okay, now what happens when that button is clicked on? Now all of this stuff happens in here. But the hardest part of all of this is breaking this down like an engineer. If I said make a tip calculator, you guys wouldn't have any problem Googling how do I convert a string to a number, but Googling how to make a tip calculator, way too big of a project, right? So starting to break that down. Well, if I'm making a tip calculator, what does the user need to input? What action does the user take? Once the user takes that action, what needs to happen in our JavaScript? Breaking that down to, we got to get the inputs. We got to get the numbers out of the inputs. We've got to do the math. We've got to get some place to show that result. Then we need to actually show it all up. Obviously, there are a lot of steps in there, and that's why these comments are super helpful for you guys to be able to trace through and say, what order is this all happening here? Karen threw a tip in the chat. I'm not going to read aloud, but I will let you guys go check out while I pull up the terms. Okay, I have added in a couple terms to get you guys started with the document object model, with get element by ID, and inner HTML. What other terms, excuse me, do we want to capture tonight?
Document object model. Oh, it's on there. Refactor. Yeah.
Improving our code by writing a second draft of it to make it easier for other developers to read and understand. Parse int and parse float. Convert a string to a number data type.
Type of?
Type of. A reserved word in JavaScript that reveals the type of the variable following it.
On click.
On click. JavaScript, I will say most commonly used JavaScript event tied to a function that runs when something is clicked
on. Recursion.
Yeah, dirty word. Just kidding. The most challenging type of loop to write as a developer, for and while loops are usually used instead. Oh, I will say a function that calls itself inside its own function code. That makes no sense. It's because recursion doesn't make sense to the human brain. Anything else?
Get element by ID. It's on there. I can't.
One step ahead of you tonight.
Thank you.
You can also blow this up.
Okay.
What else?
So the inner HTML and the get element ID are the opposite of each other? No.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Get element by ID is just kind of us reaching into the HTML.
And finding it.
Inner HTML is used in conjunction with get element by ID to update a specific part of the element.
Okay.
So we use like get element by ID, and then we got the value out of it. We use the value for the inputs. For the inner HTML, that's what we put back into the HTML. You can also do things like .style and add some CSS in your JavaScript. Or there are other properties in there other than just inner HTML and input.
Okay. Okay.
On click is actually another one, right? We did document.getElement by ID, the button, and then we added the on click on top of that. That is all part of the document object model. How are we feeling? Is this what we thought JavaScript was going to be like?
Didn't really know what to expect.
Fair enough.
Can we go over async again?
Do I have to? So all async is doing, the only thing async is doing is letting us use this await keyword down here. So
Okay.
we can't use the await keyword until we tell the computer heads up,
Yeah.
asynchronous code is coming your way. And then this is just nasty syntax to make our async code run right away.
Okay.
There are cleaner ways of writing this. You could say like const my async code equals async as a function. And then say my async code down here. That's the cleaner way of writing it.
Okay.
Less ugly syntax, more verbiage around it, but the basic idea is still the same. In order to use this await keyword, we have to use async up here. Async and await won't come back until the API module in 3 weeks. And that will get into not only async await, but also promises with .then, all coming down the pipeline. All right, I've already held you captive 3 minutes over class time. If any questions pop up, you know where my one-on-one link is, you know where I'm at in Slack. Otherwise, I will see you guys tomorrow.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.